So, I want to ask you two things to begin with. In the spiritual space, you can define that however you like, the space in which we work, what bothers you and what do you love?
That's a great question. Recently we've been talking quite a bit in private conversations about spiritual narcissism or psychedelic narcissism.
Mm-hmm.
There's kind of this, like, I think Philippa Wilkin called it like Hollywood spirituality, kind of that she associates with kind of LA. Not really. I suppose that's maybe a bit sounds disparaging, but it's also just, I think, a natural human phenomenon to get kind of wrapped up in appearances and superficiality. But there is this segment of the kind of spiritual or psychedelic or new age community that seems to be participating in these things more from a place of ego and kind of trying to really wear the costume and like have, this kind of spiritual chic clothing and have all the markers of spirituality. It's sort of like spirituality and psychedelia are a fashion trend for some people, and it's kind of all about like what's on your spiritual resume. How many ayahuasca sessions have you had? How many times have you gone on a Wim Hof retreat or something, or like, how many times have you danced naked in the Himalayas or something, like, and
500 times.
Yeah, at least. There's this kind of misguidedness around what spirituality really means, and some people don't even realize the extent to which they're kind of using spirituality as a persona rather than, and it's more about, it's just another game of appearances and status and virtue signaling, rather than actually being deeply invested in the inner journey, which is largely a thing that no one sees. It's something that you do largely privately and within yourself, and kind of makes me think of that term you used recently, no fuss spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
I think, did you say Alan Watts? Mentioned that? Yeah, like no fuss spirituality is, would you want to define it?
Well, I haven't. I interviewed Jules Evans on a podcast, and he's the one who told me about no fuss spirituality. I haven't really read Watts' definition of it. But when I was speaking to Jules, we were talking about how sometimes the most spiritual people in the world could be like someone who doesn't like proclaim to meditate or take psychedelics, but is just full of compassion and will just make you a meal with love and offer you tea when you just want to cozy up by a fire. It reminds me actually of Nikolai, a friend of ours. When we first met Nico, we'd all be hanging out, and he would just come around and be like, "I've made tea. Would you like any?" And I was like, I didn't think of making everyone tea, but I so much appreciate that you did that, and that was a really good signal to me that he was quite like a good example of someone who practices spirituality.
Yeah, I think Nikolai is a great example. He's somebody who just tends to be wearing plain clothes, not making a show of anything. It's like you wouldn't just see him on the street and be like, oh, that guy's really advertising the fact that he's ultra spiritual. And yet, when you interact with Nikolai, you encounter this person who's just really flowing and really emanating this kind of joy and love. And there's this really apparent embodied presence and attunement to what's going on in his surroundings, and this heart of compassion. And so there's this sense from the internal that he's gone very deep into this work and gone very deep within himself on kind of a spiritual journey, but it's not something that he's using as kind of a costume or a persona. It's just like something you sense from the way that he is. So yeah, I would say, and it's probably true that most all of us, to varying degrees, like, have a bit of a spiritual egotism and kind of to varying degrees, and so that's quite possibly why I find myself getting triggered by what I perceive to be spiritual narcissism, because to some extent it's probably mirroring back to me something which is also present in me to some degree.
I think also the noting of that and the dislike of that in other people, even if it doesn't mirror you, it's still the ego. It's still time that you could be just simply practicing being present, being full of love, and you're spending your time kind of going, I don't like the way this person's like appearing to be spiritual. A meditation writer called Joseph Goldstein, he actually said that he would go on retreats, he would run retreats, and he would keep noting how unmindful everyone was. And then he realized how unmindful he was being, noticing how unmindful everyone else was being. That's the paradox.
That is a paradox, yeah. That's fascinating. And I kind of, found myself doing that when we were at Envision Festival a few weeks ago, because Envision Festival in Costa Rica is this, like, it's sort of meant to be a convergence of all these super spiritual people, and everybody's got, like decked out in the kind of spiritual garb and stuff, and there's quite a bit of like over the top spiritual, like what people would think of as being spiritual, like interactions taking place, like just over the top positivity and charisma that feels contrived, but people feel like, oh, I'm spiritual, so I need to be like smiley, be like, oh my God, love, it's been so long, like, oh, I adore you so much, like, how many, when was your last ceremony or whatever, like, there was a fair bit of that was a bit like, it just felt contrived at times, but also I agree that me even like just noticing that and kind of judging that in other people was also my ego acting up to an extent, and it was a really interesting mirror in that way.
Where do you think that this stems from psychologically in people, that they're more concerned about the appearance of with spirituality rather than like practicing it in a no fuss kind of way?
That's a good question. I think that it's hard to say if it has deeper like evolutionary psychological roots, but I would say we, particularly in say the United States, but really a lot of the kind of current global monoculture, we live within a culture that is extraordinarily obsessed with appearances, really. The kind of consumerist matrix is constantly bombarding us with advertisements that sort of implicitly signal to us that the most important thing is how your life looks to other people. Like, you should have these shiny clothes and this shiny car, you should be smiling all the time, you should have this hair product, this hairdo. And so I think that tendency of our culture has just been kind of transposed or onto spirituality, as spirituality has become more mainstream, more of a trend, more consumerized and commodified. It's inevitably kind of begun to fall prey to these same consumerist traps as the rest of the kind of present global Western hyper-consumerist monoculture. But as well, I think that signaling is something very deep in human biology, in evolution. We are constantly, all of us, basically like signaling things to other people, and we can do this through our actions, our words, but an easy way to signal things is through appearances as well. And so humans tend to care quite a lot about appearances and what they're signaling and who they're signaling to and stuff like that. So it kind of makes sense that virtually every subculture, every human group is going to have, to some extent, a fixation on appearances and like what's being signaled. Yeah.
What it reminds me of when you talk about Envision Festival, when I was about 15, 16 in the UK, I don't know if it was in America, there was this movement called the emo movement, emo like for emotional, and everyone was kind of all the guys were growing their fringes, getting like belts with like studded like metallic bits in there, getting piercings. I had both my ears pierced. I dyed my fringe purple, and I was kind of like, I didn't know why I was doing it, but I was just kind of being pulled into this, and I was listening to certain types of music, and the people I was hanging around with like also dressing in this way. And I guess a part of me was just like, oh, out of all the groups that I just want to identify with, I don't know what the mission is behind the emo movement, but I've just chosen this. I've fallen into this group. And I wonder if people like who get like those types of people who are just getting into spirituality for like the appearance of it are just choosing, oh, out of all these different groups that I can be a part of, this group I feel the most accepted in, and you know, I'm just going to go hang out with those and kind of wear and act like they act, and they lose touch with that key like core philosophy of what started that movement in the first place.
Yeah, and part of it is just the aesthetic appeal. Yeah, people just find it aesthetically appealing and see that it's a popular thing, and so they like the way it looks to be, you know, wearing the yoga pants and the Rave Nectar t-shirt. I love you, Rave Nectar. But yeah, and yeah, I mean, to some extent, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, from a kind of cosmic perspective, maybe there's nothing wrong with anything at all, period. But it does kind of, to an extent, it can be misleading about what spirituality really is when people are looking from the outside and they sort of just see all these people dressing this certain way and, you know, saying namaste and like just throwing out all the signals of spirituality, of so-called spirituality or the New Age or psychedelia. It can look a bit like a put-on and like an over-the-top kind of thing, and it can be misleading about what these things are essentially about when you really like dive deep into having certain experiences and reading certain books and starting to go on an internal journey, and you start to see that it's really it's not at all about your external appearance and like what you're signaling. I would say. Would
you say then that the people who do this, act in these ways, not only are they kind of distracting themselves from the most important parts of spirituality, they're actually like damaging their own growth as a spiritual being by kind of focusing so much on the kind of like fad element of spirituality?
Yeah, I would say you can really get lost in that aspect of it and think that that's what it's all about, and think like, oh, I've got the spiritual chic clothes and I've had 7 iboga ceremonies now, and so, you know, I thought it was so interesting how Jules Evans on your podcast with him talked about how if you're having psychedelic experiences within a very egoic kind of frame of mind, they can actually end up just fueling your ego or like enhancing your ego, and you can, you know, kind of think you've seen the light and kind of get just kind of a messiah complex almost about the work that you perceive yourself as doing, and you can kind of delude yourself into thinking that you're in a more awakened or enlightened state, but really you just like bought some pants from Thailand and like took some drugs and saw some crazy stuff, and it didn't actually break you open and like expand your compassion and help you transcend your ego, like transcend the small s self and this fixation on your narrative being the kind of center of the universe, which in my estimation, that's a significant part of what true spirituality is about, is diminishing that suffocation and that entrapment within the small s self, within the ego, where we're just totally identified with our thoughts and our particular narrative, and we're kind of prisoners of our own mind and our own story. Spirituality is sort of about transcending that and to reach a freer place of being more like the witness of the small s self and being in touch with this more expansive capital S self, or this more expansive reality. And so, yeah, when people use spirituality and psychedelics just to drive them deeper into the ego and into kind of spiritual narcissism, they are just like actually refortifying the walls around the ego, which true spirituality is arguably intended to fracture, penetrate, detonate. So
that's what I wanted to go into with you now. Is so what is like spirituality practiced properly or right, as you see it? Like, what is the purpose of it?
That's a great question. So spirituality practiced properly or right, I think immediately there's a sense that I need to say that I don't think there is one right way to practice spirituality. I don't think there's one proper path. I don't subscribe to dogmatic notions of like laying down a specific doctrine and saying this is the proper way to advance spiritually or attain enlightenment. I think that each person really does need to kind of determine for themselves what practices and what ideas work for them, and kind of, to an extent, find their own way, find their own enlightenment, find out what it means to them, while also kind of being informed by teachers that have come before that have been very wise and such. But I guess for me, but with that being said, I would say for me personally, what spirituality is really about is it relates to what I was just saying about transcending the ego, transcending the small s self to get in touch with this more expansive reality, this capital S self that is coincident with all of nature, all of the cosmos. It's sort of realizing that you are an inseparable piece of the entire process of reality, realizing that you're not a separate, alienated, skin-encapsulated ego, that is a more narrow and ultimately more like less real identity than your deeper identity, as sort of one with everything that exists. And the more you kind of are able to surrender and let go of the ego and the small self and kind of become the observer of it, or the witness, and stop identifying so much with your thoughts and feelings, you start to tap into this beautiful spaciousness where you see that not everything, that things don't actually revolve around you, and you don't have to take yourself so seriously. You don't have to clench your fists and make everything a big deal and be thinking my life is the center of everything and everything is just so important. You can kind of heave this sacred sigh of relief and enter this different kind of mode of existence where things are just lighter and freer, and you feel you're just less reactive overall. It's harder for things to perturb you, and it starts to become easier to just kind of get into a flow in life, like just begin to flow with life and existence in a way where you're just kind of trusting your path, trusting the cosmos, trusting the unfolding of everything, and just surrendering, practicing non-resistance, just accepting reality moment to moment as it comes, and gradually through this process liberating your consciousness, really allowing yourself to just gradually removing the blocks to higher degrees of acceptance and internal peace, internal freedom, laughter, joy, humor, love, so that these things that are really within all of us but are often blocked by our lower emotions and our egos are able to just kind of expand and flow outward, and we can experience just more of those very liberating and freeing and fulfilling states. I would say that's
so. Listening to that, I see some themes if I reduce it down. So the first thing you said was, I think you were saying that like everyone should find what enlightenment is for them, and then aim toward that. So there's the kind of implicit assumption that practicing spirituality you're headed somewhere, like towards a type of enlightenment that you define, right? So
potentially. Yes, but also maybe there's not a final destination. Like my view is kind of that there are just ever more layers that can be peeled back, and that we're kind of on this endless upward spiraling journey. But yeah, it does lead in a certain
you're at
direction,
least pointing a certain way.
Yeah.
Whether there's a destination or not, you're aiming.
Right.
So there's that. Then there's the kind of like tapping into like the wider consciousness instead of being so trapped in your own ego. And then there's liberation, which is like the end of suffering mixed in there. So those are the three kind of things that I see. So what if someone turned around at Envision Festival and was like, look, I am like allowing these emotions to come up within me. I am feeling really good. I am on my own journey towards my own definition of enlightenment. And I do feel tapped into to collective consciousness. So what am I doing wrong?
Yeah, I might say, well, I guess you're functioning as a very good mirror for me and showing me that I'm judging a book by its cover when in fact there's more going on beneath the surface, and I'm misperceiving just like spiritual narcissism where there is none, maybe by projecting my own onto you or judging or something. Although, yeah, I don't know. It is really hard to say where a person's really at, and so it is a great practice to attempt to be non-judgmental and just kind of give people the benefit of the doubt and just kind of assume that, I mean, there always is much more to the story than what is revealed on the surface level, but there is just, at times you can just get this strong sense of a certain artificiality coming from people about the way they're doing things, and that's just, it maybe I'm projecting, but to some extent you have to, I trust my intuition on this because I've, I don't know, been around a lot of people in these spaces and been honing this intuition, not just within the spiritual niche, but just in life in general for years, just kind of honing this almost like hip-hop, like real, recognize real kind of sense, where I feel like I can tell pretty quickly if someone is kind of giving me a put on or like a show, and their personality is more of a persona, and it's coming from a place of, I'm very concerned with what others think of me, and I'm trying to put on a certain mask that I think others want to see, versus like someone who's actually peeled back the layers, penetrated through a lot of their layers of conditioning and persona and ego and indoctrination, and gone on an authentic kind of journey deeper and deeper into who they really are, and begun to allow that deep honesty and love to flow through them, and just stripped away the parts of the self that just want to act based on what you think other people want to see, which is really a terrible kind of cage of suffering to be in. I think it's probably one of the worst forms of psychological suffering, is just living your life out of alignment with who you really are, and basically just constantly putting on a show, giving other people what you think they want to see.
On a side note to that topic, when you hear that, I could fully agree with you, but there's another trap to that where you can start seeing not caring as the ideal, and then you start trying to appear as someone who doesn't care. And then that's like another kind of trap that you can fall into, because I've been through that myself, where I was like, I shouldn't give a fuck about anything, I shouldn't care what people think. Oh shit, I'm caring what people think, bad, and then it comes this other layer of like judgment, and so if you do care what people think, then like just note that you care what people think, and just sort of like, of course you want to move past it eventually, but just try and have like a light-hearted perspective on your own thoughts and feelings. That's also a big part of spirituality, I think, is Andy Puddicombe, who was the founder of Headspace. He said that advanced meditators, they tend to see meditation as a type of play, whereas like new meditators tend to be very rigid and sort of contrived and, oh, I'm distracted, that's bad, I'm a bad meditator. An advanced meditator will be like, haha, the mind, it's doing its thing. I see you, I see that thought. And just very playful.
Right. Having a sense of humor about your own humanness.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's huge because again, of course, to varying degrees, probably all of us, except maybe like, the Buddha or some of these sages, like, care what people think. It's so deeply embedded in our biology to care what people think about us. It used to be much more a matter of life and death, what your immediate tribe members thought of you. And so this is so deeply ingrained in us that, yeah, it is very good to be honest about that. Like, you can gradually diminish that more and more. It's very liberating, but I would be lying if I said that I didn't care at all what people think of me. Yeah. But now I'm more able to like see those thoughts and feelings arise when I'm having concern about what someone might think of me or someone judging me, and I observe that I have some fear of being judged or fear of being not good enough or inferior, and I'm able to just kind of witness that arising within myself and kind of have this gentle compassion and kind of internally give myself a hug and say like, oh, poor little human Jordan, like with his oh so human concern about what the other monkeys might think of him, and have a bit of a sense of humor about it and space and it's some space around it, so that I'm not just suffocating within it, and it's not just it's in the light of consciousness. It's not just I'm not just pushing it into the unconscious. So then if I did that, it would just be running me, and I wouldn't even realize that I'm being run by this unconscious program that's causing me to just create a persona constantly based on fear of what others might think. But yeah, it's a good point that you can conform even to non-conformity. Like, just have a sense of like, oh, the cool kids are the kids who don't conform and don't care. So now I'm going to build a new persona based on that, and I'm going to become really narcissistic and egotistical about the fact that I'm a nonconformist and I don't care what other people think. And then, yeah, many layers, many traps for sure to fall into.
Yeah, like with the whole like when any kind of structure. This is something I got from Darren Brown. He's like someone I really like. He wrote a book called Happy. It's primarily a Stoic book, on Stoicism, and he said whenever there's a movement that gets opposed, the thing that opposes it often inherits the structure of the movement that it's opposing. So if you think of it like this, like if someone wants to bring down capitalism, for example, what you'll probably find is that the way the people who bring it down, the way they organize themselves and delegate responsibilities, it will kind of be in some sort of dominance hierarchy that mimics capitalism. So that there's like to truly bring down any kind of hierarchical system, you'd need to do it truly in a way that was without hierarchies, but that's never going to happen, right?
Right.
So
yeah, we've seen this repeatedly throughout history, really, like revolutionary movements that want to overthrow existing power structures, develop their own power structures, and the people who thought of themselves as the good guys just become the new bad guys. If they manage to overthrow the existing power structure, they then just basically mirror they fall into the same traps, and absolute power corrupts absolutely in the new people, and then there's just sort of a new problematic, like dysfunctional power hierarchy. So yeah, it goes back to that quote from Nietzsche, just one of my favorites of all time: "Whomsoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process they do not become a monster." Because I love that. Yeah, it just sums it up so well, that nugget of like the most dangerous position to be in the world, quite possibly, is to be thinking, I'm one of the good guys. I'm on the good team, therefore anything we do in the name of good is justified because we're the good guys. That's pretty much the line of thinking that has probably resulted in the most, like millions of deaths, just the most violence throughout human history, is getting this idea, we're right, we're the good guys, therefore we're justified in genocide and every other, form of terrifying acts that humans have committed throughout history. So yeah,
if we bring this back as well to the topic that we started talking about, psychedelics, or like you could say spirituality as well, but like I'm thinking about psychedelics as used in the spiritual space. What you'll find with the kind of the narcissistic element of people who take psychedelics is that often people who take psychedelics, they feel like outsiders. Many people I've spoken to who got into spirituality and taking psychedelics and healing felt like outsiders. Maybe they weren't the popular kid in school, and then what can happen is that they start taking psychedelics and then they start thinking of everyone else as like a sheep.
Mm-hmm.
And they start kind of having that same kind of like structure that they oppose, and they start becoming that, but from while in the psychedelic space, like the bullies of the spiritual world.
Yeah, absolutely. I wrote about that in the article 5 Myths About Psychedelics, that we need to stop spreading this tendency of people within the psychedelic community to fall prey to this classic trap of in-group, out-group dynamics and tribalism, basically, this exact trap that has plagued human history of dividing into in-groups and out-groups and saying, we're putting your in-group above everyone else and saying we're the good guys, we know best. You see it even, with people who take psychedelics and just decide that everyone who hasn't taken psychedelics is a sheep and is just, living a meaningless, like, conformist existence. And it's like, well, no, we probably wouldn't really want everyone to become a technicolor, psychedelic, shamanic individual. We need, like, a whole mass of people who are more drawn to a kind of a more conservative, traditional way of life, so that we have people who are like plumbers and electricians and like keeping up the infrastructure of civilization that we all take for granted, and managing these supply chains and just being stable and having families and being high in conscientiousness and not just out on the fringes of consciousness territory trying to bring back some gems of wisdom. If we all tried to do that, I think things would rapidly collapse. So there's this yin and yang of like some people being called to explore new territories and open up new vistas of possibility, while others are called to preserve the strides we've already taken and how far we've already come, and to keep the rather miraculous infrastructure of civilization intact so that things can continue to function and we can have food in our stomachs and food for our children, while also exploring greater possibilities that humanity might uncover.
I think humility is something that's missing from the spiritual space. Like a really deep humility. I was speaking to someone recently, and they were on a full self-improvement spirituality kind of mission, where they were practicing all these different spiritual practices, and they were feeling really good, but they would get annoyed with their family, and they were convinced that the way they were doing things was right, the way their family were doing things and the way their family were thinking was so suboptimal, that they would start getting angry at their family for not like doing the things that they're doing, not reading the books they're reading. And it's like a classic thing that people do when they first start out.
Oh yeah.
And one of the things you can do, like if you find yourself like this, is start like trying to see how other people, like ordinary people who are not, like don't do the things you do, how they might be living like a really amazing life based on their values, because like there's no right or wrong. I think, did Nietzsche say something like, I have my way, you have your way, but as for the right way, it doesn't exist. And that's something I try to do now. If I see someone like someone who's like sweeping the road, I just like try and look at him and think like, maybe he's like a really good dad. Maybe he's made huge sacrifices. Maybe he didn't have the family that I had. Maybe he's super skilled at this thing that has nothing to do with books. I don't know. Like maybe I'm lacking things that he has. Who knows?
Absolutely. And when you look at a person's face like that, often you see like the lines that trace like a true a truly deep, intricate story, and you can just tell like that person. It's like Jordan Peterson says, everybody is like a Dostoevsky character if you ask the right questions and listen closely enough. Human beings are remarkably complex and have these incredible and heartbreaking narratives, just everyone you run into. And so, yeah, to get this idea like, oh, look at that sheep over there, like sweeping the road. It's just like, no, when you actually let go of those judgments and you start seeing with fewer and fewer blinders on, I think everyone's faces start to actually radiate this deeply beautiful, like kind of tragically beautiful humanness that we all have, where we've all been through the labyrinth. No one has lived a lot of years on this planet without going through their own particular labyrinth, going through their own trials and having to summon inner resources to make it through. And so, yeah, to dismiss another human being's depth based on some first glance is really, yeah, a judgmental, non-humble thing to do. And I say that thinking about like how I did that with some people at Envision Festival. And it's funny how often it's most easy to do that with like the people who are like closest to us in some sense, either our family or people who are in our, like seemingly in our in-group or in our niche. Sometimes they become the out-group more easily than the person who's just vastly different from us on the other side of the world. So that's a fascinating tendency. But what you said about family reminded me of Ram Dass's classic quote, like, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family. I always come back to that one. It's just like, yeah,
that's great.
It's so great. And it's really, I think, yeah, if your family is deeply triggering to you, it's really an opportunity to practice letting people be where they are. Because, yeah, one of the big lessons of the last few years for me has been, if you think that it's not okay where people are at now, and you think, God, I need to bring them from point A to point B, I see how to enlighten these people, and you try to force feed your wisdom down their throats and tell them, like, you need to start eating vegan, and you need to start reading, Alan Watts and Terrence McKenna and stuff like this. You try to force feed this stuff to people. It's never going to work. People are immediately resistant to anyone trying to force them to do anything. And so really you let people be where they are. You endeavor to see the beauty in where they are and the beauty in what they're doing, and see the ways in which you can learn from them, and they actually have capacities you don't have that they can teach you. And then if you do feel you have ways in which you've grown that could be beneficial for them, really the best you can do is kind of try to let go of your own ego and judgments and lower emotions, so that you can become a clearer mirror for them, so that you can just show. The more you do this work and the more you kind of purify yourself, I think you become a clearer mirror, showing other people themselves and giving them a hint of like a different way of being that might be possible, that's just more relaxed and more chilled than stewing in resentment or anger or whatever their hang-ups are. So you can be a clear mirror, and then maybe you can find places to dispense like breadcrumbs here and there by just simply asking a poignant question at a certain moment, or saying like, oh, have you ever thought of it this way or considered this, but coming from a place of deep humility and sort of, yeah, being I think Robert Anton Wilson called himself like a guerrilla ontologist, like a covertly dispensing breadcrumbs and like planting seeds that might later blossom into a realization, because it's almost like people don't change until they feel like they had the idea to change for themselves, and they had the realization themselves. So got to let them be where they are, and you can just covertly, act as a mirror and plant seeds here and there, but that's about all you can do, I think. So
we're talking about changing people. That's like an interesting topic.
Yeah.
Because the first thing is like, do we have the right to say what's best for someone? That's the fundamental part of wanting people to be different.
Right.
It's a tricky one.
And I don't know that we do. It is quite arrogant to think like, oh, I really see that this person would just be better off,
Yeah.
better off if they read the Tao Te Ching and the Kabbalion and started practicing Hermeticism or something like this. Yeah, it's just, I don't know if we can say that. And so again, that to me supports the view of like, not really. Well, yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I am kind of in favor of dispensing breadcrumbs here and there that might give people food for thought. They can kind of take it and do what they want with it, but you kind of plant seeds that just, they might blossom into new possibilities for a person if that person elects to go there. But it's kind of like they can take that and go wherever they want with it. You're not really choosing a direction for them. You're just kind of indicating, oh, hey, there is like a portal here to a variety of other possibilities for life. If you want to like glance through that sometime, you might find it alluring and you might be drawn in this way. But other than that, yeah, just doing your own work so that you can be a mirror, and then how people change in response to you, that's on them as well. You're just being yourself ultimately, and I mean, we are all changing each other constantly by just interfacing with each other, I would say. So yeah.
It's like, I'm thinking of like the classic example of a person who's like highly competitive and aggressive, not violent, but just aggressive in their nature. When they do something, they do it aggressively. And then contrast that with someone who's like completely hates competition and has like no aggression at all, and is very, very chill. Well, like, because they both have different personalities, different values, the really chill person could say that person's way too competitive, I don't like it, way too aggressive, they need to chill. You could definitely make the argument that the chill person could become more competitive for his own interest as well. And there's no like right or wrong there. It's you could make either case.
Yeah, it could very well be the case that both are true, and integrating the shadow in both cases would be useful. The chill person can integrate their dormant aggression and grow some claws and some assertiveness that will help them, and the highly aggressive competitive person can tap into the peace and the chillness within themselves to just allow them in general to take life a bit less seriously, have a bit more humor, a bit more relaxation, which I think most would agree is a nice thing to have. It's useful for a lot of reasons. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. One thing we haven't talked about is the upsides, the good.
Yes.
Your original question was about the good things about spirituality and well, kind of the spiritual community or the spiritual niche. Yeah, I mean, I see a ton of good things happening, I think. Personally, I feel like integrating spirituality in a wiser, non-dogmatic way into civilization at this moment is quite an important thing to do, because I think another core theme of spiritual practice and spiritual realization is re-enchanting the world and re-enchanting nature and re-establishing connectedness with ourselves and with others and with nature. And I think that is something that's going to be quite essential for us to do if we want to course correct as a species and avoid decimating ourselves in the biosphere. We need to reactivate and deepen this kind of ecological consciousness. And I think there is quite a lot of that happening in the spiritual community and the psychedelic community, and that's starting to seep in more and more into the mainstream culture. And so that's something that I really love to see. I mean, there's a huge array of things, really. I mean, I wouldn't have poured thousands of hours of my life into HighExistence and into the work that we do, and I wouldn't have attempted to go so deep on this path myself if I didn't see tremendous value both on an individual level in terms of just freeing yourself from the shackles that block joy and love and humor and beauty and magic from being part of your life, and then as well on the collective level, I really think that spirituality and psychedelics are an important puzzle piece in the kind of emerging story of this historical moment. I think they're actually quite important as we figure out how to kind of integrate the shadow of humanity as a whole and re-enchant the world and just kind of upgrade our collective wisdom and our collective decision-making ability. I think these are tools that can help us. A lot of humanity's oldest, most potent psychological technologies are found within the domains of spirituality and psychedelics. So we're sort of re-unlocking this very old treasure chest, looking for new tools because we're in a moment of very high stakes in which apocalyptic scenarios are unfortunately quite possible. I don't know if I'd say they're the most likely, but we're really in a high stakes environment, I guess, as a species at this moment.
Beautiful. One of the things I wanted to say is about spirituality is that it's kind of popular now that spirituality and these practices are purely designed for calmness and positive mind states. But actually, I believe to the Buddha, the point of the Eightfold Path, point of meditation was to know himself, to know the mind. Socrates said, to know thyself. That's incredibly important. And if you can really know how your mind works, then you almost it's like a superpower. You can know how other people's minds works as a result of that, because you can see how you think. So we're all the same species. You can kind of make better decisions based on how you think other people think. So that's really important. And if you know yourself and you know others, the likelihood that you're going to be cruel and unconscious is greatly diminished. Even if you do a bunch of other stuff that might be a bit of a distraction, just gaining knowledge of self. And I think going back to the Envision Festival example, if anyone who was present in the Envision Festival was able to have a conversation with us and sort of express self-insight and awareness, then they're doing something right, big time. Because I think that's what it's all about, is like knowledge of self. And I think with the kind of scientific movement, we started to see the mind as this material thing that we could label, and spirituality is really good at bringing us back into our own bodies and learning our own mind firsthand, and that's beautiful and important.
Absolutely. And yeah, I do want to note that I did meet many beautiful people at Envision Festival. Envision Festival people, you're awesome. I didn't mean for this to turn into an Envision Bash Fest. But yeah, I think that's a great point about reintegrating other forms of human intelligence as well. That's something that I see happening in the spiritual and psychedelic spaces that I think is extraordinarily important, because if you look at the work of someone like Ian McGilchrist, we just published an article about him. This is a really good access point to kind of think about these things. His work is kind of about the different purposes served by the left and right hemisphere of the brain, and how these two systems they overlap a lot, and they both work together to construct reality, but they do have different purposes. And in his work, he's kind of found that, or he's proposed based on his research, that cultures and civilizations begin to flourish when these two hemispheres are more balanced, and that often collapses of civilizations are precipitated by the left hemisphere becoming dominant and sort of forgetting about the right hemisphere. So, and to define the difference between the two, really, the left, and this is of course a paraphrase and simplification, but the left hemisphere is more of the linear, rational thinking mind, kind of this more spotlight consciousness, and the kind of the mind that we've really glorified in Western culture and put on a pedestal, the kind of the sort of foundation of a kind of scientific spotlight, like slice things up and quantify things view of the world. And the right brain system is more has more to do with a more holistic, synthesizing, intuitive intelligence that kind of sees the big picture and kind of feels the truth and synthesizes the truth in a way that's different from the left hemisphere. And so I do personally think that that we've sort of become deeply invested in the linear, conceptual, categorical, rational mind, the left hemisphere, and that this has actually really blinded us in many ways to ourselves and to the full domain of the human experience, and blinded us to capacities within ourselves and within human nature that we need to unlock if we want to restore harmony within global civilization. And so I think spirituality and psychedelics are ways of reactivating and getting back in touch with the capacities of the right hemisphere, which have more to do with the intuition and I'm not an expert in this, but also I would suspect more to do with reconnecting with like that heart level intelligence, the intelligence of compassion and love, and seeing through the eyes of compassion and love, and reconnecting with the body's more innate, kind of fluid, flowing, holistic intelligence as well, which often, if you're deeply in touch with your body and your heart and intuition, you're just more in a state of flow in life, and the right answers to what to do next just seem to appear very organically, and the path just kind of unfolds before you, and you're just, it's clear what to do. And if you're someone who's been steeped in the kind of rational mind and trying to think your way through everything in life, and then you start to unlock this more intuitive way of interfacing with the world, it can really seem like quite a revelation and almost on the verge of feeling like magic to unlock some of these capacities, I would say. And so on the individual level, it can be extraordinarily useful to get back in touch with the right hemisphere, and I think as well on a civilizational level, this is needed. So
I love that, and I'm definitely very like right brain dominant. I've read a book by Daniel Pink, actually wrote something similar. I think it was like Why Right Brainers Will Rule the World or something like that. It was a really good book. So yeah, the right hemisphere is all about story, symphony, creativity, and yeah, that heart focus. But one thing I noticed was that when I was reading about this, I was loving it because I knew I was right brain dominant, and I would be much less likely to read a book that was called Why Left Brainers Will Rule the World, right? Because I had that resistance there. You know? Yeah. So it's like, give me more of this because it feels good. It's affirming that I'm special, that I'm doing something right. You know, why I might rule the world. So I think that we do always want to kind of balance them as individuals as well. So like me being right brain dominant, it's good for me to practice math and logic and being more rational. And if you are left brain dominant, then really, like if you're listening to this, see it as an invitation to start getting more in touch with story and creativity and intuition and your feelings, you know, not overthinking things, just following your heart. So yeah, that's my little point on that.
Yeah. No, that's such a good point. Goes back to humility and being aware of our own biases and our own tendencies to just want to confirm our own specialness and our own narrative. But yeah, I think ultimately that a human being in its fullness, like a highly developed human being, will integrate both hemispheres in a substantial way. And that, I think, it reminds me of David Chapman's work on meaningness.com. He kind of adapts Robert Keegan's model of human development, and sort of like the stage 5 of human development, which is the highest stage that David maps out, which is like the meta-rational fluid stage, where you're kind of employing whatever lenses or systems are appropriate in a given context, and you're able to kind of flow fluidly in life. It's not possible, according to his map, to reach that stage until you've passed through the rational stage. So you actually have to deeply understand and integrate the value of rationality and the tools of rationality, of math and science and logic and reasoning, and really understand the value of that before you can kind of transcend it and go to this this more integral place, and I think that there's a similar parallel to that in Ken Wilber's work as well. He adapted spiral dynamics, another model of human development, but it is, I think, deeply important to integrate the rational. Although, this may be my bias, but I have come to see, I think it was Einstein actually that said that like the rational mind is a faithful servant, and like the intuitive mind is, I can't remember the specific way he framed it, but something like the intuitive mind is the kind of all-seeing eye, or the more robust or kind of brilliant human intelligence, and that we need that holistic intelligence as the most fundamental foundation, but then within that, the rational, linear, categorical mind can be an extraordinarily useful kind of scalpel for all sorts of very more particular things that we need to accomplish, and problems we need to solve, technologies we need to invent, things like this. That's kind of my current view on it, but I could be biased since I also am probably at this point right hemisphere dominant, although also I'm someone who spent a lot of my life living in the rational mind as well, so I don't know.
You could be quite balanced, but I know that you tend to be more passionate about the kind of right brain pursuits, the right hemisphere pursuits, creativity especially.
Very true.
And things like accounting, you don't seem to be like, and math is like something that it depends on the context, I guess.
Yeah. Actually, I love doing math at the poker table.
There you go.
So it does depend on the activity, but
Einstein is a really good example as well, because some of his, I know that he was definitely good at math, but he had a lot of help with math too, and his main like contribution was through using his creativity and coming up with the like thought experiments, and then having to figure out the math for those afterwards to see if they actually worked, and then later on scientific experiments to see if they held up. And Einstein's discoveries were like some of the best in human history. So
right, I think that does tend to be the pattern within great scientific breakthroughs, is that they tend to come from people who are more in the space of intuition and imagination, and in the right hemisphere, that kind of have this visionary download where they're like, oh shit, what if it's this way? And then you use the left brain to actually cut it up and quantify it and piece it together. But the people who are solely working in science in the left hemisphere, I suspect it's much rarer for such a person to have a large breakthrough or paradigm shift, because the left hemisphere tends to operate within categories that have already been conceived. I think it's operating within a particular system and framework that's already been devised, rather than being able to step back from that and see that as one paradigm that might possibly, the entire thing might be based on faulty assumptions. I don't know.
I actually, this reminds me of I saw an article once about a chess prodigy, and they scanned his brain when he was playing chess, and they found that when he was thinking about what move to make, he was using his right hemisphere, which was quite shocking to the people who were looking at him, because of course he wasn't seeing a chessboard, he wasn't seeing just numbers, he was seeing something else. I don't know what he was seeing, but after like hours and hours and hours of practice, the chessboard transforms, and then he would just switch to his left hemisphere to make the move. So this is it's very interesting, this, and I want to learn more about it.
Yeah, I would love to as well. That's fascinating. I wonder if his right hemisphere was just intuiting and synthesizing based on just a massive data set that you could not parse just in a linear way. It was doing this non-linear synthesizing process of just like feeling into all the data he's ever gathered. And it probably is integrating a lot of the lessons from left brain analysis, but then incorporating it in this more robust and holistic kind of synthesizing function.
Yeah, sounds like probably what was going on, I would think. So we've covered a lot of ground in quite a short space of time. I want to switch this up now and go a bit more personal and just sort of ask you, what are you doing at the moment, or generally over the last few weeks, to help yourself from becoming too egotistical, to help yourself remain grounded, to help yourself to not get caught up in the appearances of things, of being spiritual? Like, how are you thinking? How are you working on that to become more kind and compassionate and more humble?
That's a great question. What's really been extraordinarily present for me in recent weeks is the use of a technique called the letting go technique that's outlined by David Hawkins in his book Letting Go, The Pathway of Surrender, which I recently finished and found to be one of the most profound books I've ever read and one of the most pragmatically useful books on spirituality that I've ever read. He outlines a technique that's quite similar to kind of acting as the witness of your own thoughts and feelings and not identifying them, which I've read about previously, but he just goes into much more really useful depth about how to kind of employ this technique and take this kind of spiritual technique of surrender or non-resistance or letting go and apply it to basically everything within your emotional life. So what it consists of is really like just frequently or gradually, to an increasing extent, you're being mindful of what is happening for you internally, like what you're currently thinking and feeling. You're not just kind of on autopilot going through the motions. You're actually becoming aware of what's going on internally for you. And when any sort of difficult emotion or thought pattern arises, let's say you notice that you're having an anxious thought pattern, what you do is you basically first you sort of try to cut off the narrativizing mind. You sort of try to silence the mind by just going into the body and connecting with the actual feeling and sensation of what's happening, because Hawkins explains that thoughts are basically endless attempts by the mind to rationalize the presence of a feeling, and so attempting to work on the level of thoughts is unlikely to be helpful because there might be 10,000 different thoughts emanating from one particular feeling. But if you can identify the feeling at the root and work with that and let it go, you could cut off like 10,000 different dysfunctional programs that your mind might be enacting. So if you experience anxiety, you sort of you notice that you're caught in a thought loop or narrative. You kind of try to just cut that off, set that aside, and go into the body and see what the feeling feels like without trying to modify it at all. You acknowledge and accept that, oh, there's fear within me. There's fear, there's anxiety. Maybe you make it more specific. There's fear of not being good enough. There's fear of things not going the right way. There's fear of being a failure. You can just kind of acknowledge that within yourself, or you can even not put it into words and instead just go into the non-linguistic space of just feeling what you're feeling and letting it come up. The key is to really just non-judgmentally and gently allow whatever is in you to be there and to come up. And as you do that, if you just acknowledge it, let it be there without trying to modify it, and allow yourself to feel it, it will start to shift the sensation as the energy behind the emotion actually depletes. You'll sort of be like almost like you can envision a pressure valve releasing as soon as you just accept very deeply and surrender to whatever you're feeling. It's a lot like a process on psychedelics, for instance, where you don't have a choice but to surrender to whatever comes up because the only way out is through. You sort of start making this a practice in daily life where anything that triggers you is seen as something valuable actually because it's showing you something that you can let go of. And so something starts to come up, you feel the feeling, you acknowledge it for what it is, you allow it to be there, and you just sit with it and let yourself feel it without trying to modify it, and it gradually empties the kind of energetic reservoir, emotional reservoir behind the feeling, and this gradually allows you to let go of resentment or anger or fear or anxiety, all these kind of more base, less useful emotions that tend to be the fuel for the ego. The ego and the small s self tends to kind of feed on like lower, more base emotions. And so if you can get down to the root of what are these emotions, and you can acknowledge that they're there, you feel them, and then you start to empty the emotional reservoir behind them, you can actually start to let these things go, which then just starts to basically undercut the ego and just kind of drain its fuel, so that it becomes less active, it becomes less powerful. So then you can just, and this allows you to start gaining more and more space around it, so that you're seeing your funny monkey mind, your funny ego, like playing out its little motions, but you're almost viewing it as, you're not identified with it, you're viewing it as a part of your mind, but almost like a funny little neurotic like child part of your mind, and you're like, oh, the funny monkey ego is at it again, look at him like spinning his wheels about X and Y, that's not really important. And you can start to develop this spaciousness and start to let the ego go and transcend it by releasing the emotional energy that's underlying it. So I've been practicing that a lot in recent weeks, and finding that to be one of the most useful spiritual techniques I've ever uncovered. And as well, just good old-fashioned meditation, different forms of meditation, some involving visualizations, connecting a lot with just the aliveness within the body. Eckhart Tolle talks about like just the energy within the body and the aliveness within the body, feeling that kind of energy field within your body and just sitting with that, how that's kind of a portal, a doorway to the now, and can take you into a nice healing meditative state where you're kind of just flooding your body with consciousness, and you're coming back to the now and getting out of the kind of narrativizing conceptual monkey mind. So yeah, I would say I've been working a lot with those modalities in recent weeks. Yeah.
Definitely want to read that book, and would love to see maybe like an in-depth article or video specifically going into that book and what you learned. Sounds significant.
It is, yeah. I definitely plan to write about it. So
great. Were you gonna say something?
I was just gonna ask, like, if what you've been doing in recent weeks.
So I'm always like trying new things, and like meditation and reading certain books, and always listening to lectures on YouTube and listening to podcasts. But for me, recently over the last 5 months, the thing that has really been helping me is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is, for those who don't know, it's a type of grappling on the ground. There's no striking, so it's very safe. So that you can like kind of learn different techniques. There are infinite techniques. Like you can never like know jiu-jitsu. Like you can always learn more and more and more. It's like a game of chess, but you can keep adding new pieces. So someone who's been studying jiu-jitsu for 50 years might have their chess army might be like 1,000 strong, and then when they compete with someone who's been studying jiu-jitsu for 3 months, they're playing some with 10 pieces. That's how you can think about it. It's quite an interesting game. And if you have two people who are very experienced, then you have 1,000 piece chess army against 1,000 piece chess army. So it's incredibly complex, very complicated, because obviously there's the psychological element, there's the physical element, there's the technical element, and then there's like the shape of the body. So yeah, it's very, very interesting and fascinating and stimulating. But for me, the why it's so good is because it forces me to keep my ego in check. There's that saying, keep your ego in check. And I wonder how many of us who practice spirituality actually are doing things that keep their ego in check. Or are they just avoiding any kind of negative feedback? Are they avoiding any kind of criticism? Do they have friends that can tell them the truth about how they're acting and behaving? You know, when you go to jiu-jitsu, you get reminded that, you know, you're not super special. You know, like if someone has been training a couple of months longer than you will lose. You know, and this especially as a guy, this tough guy persona that you carry around with you, this, you know, oh, if someone messed with me or made me angry, I could beat them up. You know, this little voice in the head that many of us carry around with us. It's not true. It's not true. And we're all untrained people are playing chess at equal skill levels with roughly the same number of pieces. You know, it's going to be a matter of luck if there was a physical confrontation. When you practice jiu-jitsu, you realize like you're actually not special, and you have to put in the work, and you keep losing. Jiu-jitsu is a continuous experience of losing while being exhausted and demoralized. That's what it is. It's continuous. And even when you get better, even if you've been practicing 10 years, you'll meet someone who's been practicing 11 years and they'll beat you. So it's not like you'll get to this point where it's like, oh, I can relax now and beat everyone. You're going to just train with people who are better than you still, and the challenge is going to rise. So yeah, practicing that has been, and Joe Rogan has also been practicing jiu-jitsu. I think there's a video of him on YouTube getting his black belt, saying that all of the people he trains with have the healthiest egos that he's met, because you know you just get beaten and you have to be humble and you have to shake hands with the person who beats you and be friends with them and keep showing up and keep going back. And if you combine something like that, it doesn't have to be jiu-jitsu, but something where you struggle, where you lose, where you experience defeat or kind of negative feedback, and you see yourself overcoming it and, you know, like improving and rising to the challenge, not only will you get a healthier ego, but you'll also probably build self-esteem in the process. And if you can combine that with like meditation or reading really good books, then I think that's a nice combo. So
absolutely, I love that. Jiu-jitsu as spiritual practice.
Yeah.
It's like Sam Harris, Jocko Willink, Tim Ferriss as well. All
I know he's practiced it.
A lot of these guys have all kind of gone deep into jiu-jitsu. That's something that's, I really want to start practicing some kind of martial arts soon, and I see that as like a really important kind of rite of passage for cultivating the warrior archetype more within myself, because I tend to be more of like a magician or lover archetype, I would say, dominant. And I think embodying the warrior archetype more could be really valuable for me, and I love the idea of it as a process of ego humbling as well.
What could happen is that maybe by kind of building the warrior side, it would actually also build the lover side with it and the magician side, because it would just sort of maybe free you up. So like basically in jiu-jitsu you have like top and bottom position, and people don't like being on the bottom, but if you can practice getting really good at being on the bottom and being comfortable while being squished, what will happen is you'll naturally get much better on top, because you'll be so relaxed if you do end up on the bottom, so your creativity will increase. Right? Wow. So when you've covered your bases in a way, when you've developed this warrior side, it's like, oh, I've got that dealt with. Now I can really let go into the lover and magician side even more. You know, that might happen. Who knows? But it's an interesting possibility. Yeah,
that's really fascinating. Yeah. Makes me think of how I don't mind being on the bottom. Quite like it. Yeah, there's a great book. There's a great book called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. That's all about. It's called. The subtitle is Rediscovering the Archetypes of Mature Masculinity, and it's all about Jungian psychology and archetypes and what masculinity looks like in its fullness. Highly recommend that book for anyone who's curious to learn more about archetypes. Yeah.
Nice. I really want to read that.
It's a great one. It's a great one, yeah. It was recommended to me by the great Martijn Scherp. He was recommending it actually to our friend Todd when we were all in Costa Rica at Rhythmia last year. Yeah. Well, I think that about does it for this conversation. We've got to get going here, so yeah. Thank you everyone for listening. It's been an enjoyable conversation. I always love talking with my best friend, John Brooks. One of the best men on the planet.
I don't know what to say. That's such a nice compliment. If you enjoyed this episode, then leave a comment and we can do more like it. Let us know what you think. I loved having this conversation and I want to do more. So.
Yeah, same here. I would love to do more as well. So yeah, let us know if you loved it. Leave a review on iTunes. That's really helpful. And yeah, we'll see you next time.
See ya.
Cheers to a high existence.